China has just cut off the USA and is banning investments in the USA due to US tariffs. That's quite a shocking story. Today is Liberation Day. Everyone is watching Donald Trump. We have only a few hours left until his speech, until the big announcements, or maybe not. We are looking at what is happening right now. The EU now wants to initiate emergency measures due to the tariffs. We have other news from Canada, from other countries that have now reported regarding the tariffs. We now have several active reactions to the tariffs because the tariffs that are being announced today. And what Donald Trump will do here today will have an impact on everything, on Bitcoin, on the stock markets, on the financial markets, on the Federal Reserve, on interest rates, and so on. That means it's really intense what's happening here right now. If I have researched this correctly, then Donald Trump's speech should take place here at 10 p.m. German time. I will definitely report on it tomorrow. What came out of this, whether any major bombshells were reported or if the whole thing turns out to be a nothing burger. But first, let's take a look at the latest developments here concerning China and the USA. This means that in response to President Trump's tariffs, China is banning companies from investing in the United States. I don't know exactly to what extent this is happening, whether it's really a ban or just restrictions. There was also a Reuters article, and in this Reuters article, it doesn't say ban, but rather it says limitation. China is restricting company investments in the USA, reports Bloomberg News. China has taken measures to prevent its companies from making investments in the United States. The goal is to create more negotiating leverage in potential trade talks with the U.S. government under President Donald Trump. This was reported by Bloomberg News on Wednesday, citing people familiar with the matter. So, this is quite a serious matter, with the trade war now increasingly igniting. That means Donald Trump has done the same. Donald Trump is also playing a very high-stakes game to be in a better negotiating position. And in the end, they will meet somewhere in the middle or something like that. It's the case that on one side, China also has a big problem. That means they have economic problems. They have already pumped massive stimulus packages into the market. I just mentioned the story recently. It was 2 days ago. We're here now. 71 or was it 72 billion into the Chinese economy are supposed to be pumped in to stimulate the 4 largest banks here in China because we have deflation problems here. The economy needs to be boosted. We have too little consumption and so on. And that's why they want to solve their problems here with stimulus packages, with money packages, with the money printer go. The problem is they also want to lower their interest rates, but they can't really do that because the US still has high interest rates. And now we have situations like the US and China being in a trade war. This is highly explosive. We need to pay close attention to what Donald Trump will announce today regarding China, how he will react to this. Zero Hedge has a very interesting piece of news here. Namely, EU plans emergency measures to protect the economy from Trump's tariffs. I don't know exactly what is planned here. There was just a report that the EU is planning some emergency measures. What it specifically means and so on, I don't know. But I've heard this repeatedly. There were several statements from Thunderline, who openly said in a speech, not in an interview, that yes, it's very problematic what's happening with the USA, and we as Europe will be so strong and so beautiful and so good, and so on. We need to position ourselves, and it's dangerous what's happening in the USA. This is not a word-for-word quote, but roughly, that's what she said. And we also see the potential for conflict here. That means China and the USA are tense now, but China and the EU are just as tense. And then we actually have the news here. United States imposes new sanctions on Russia. So now it's not just USA and China, USA and Europe, but also USA and Russia. Now things might be a bit more hardened here. The situation. I also don't know exactly what these sanctions are. It's very difficult at the moment to find out. In any case, it seems there are some sanctions. We'll probably see everything clearly tomorrow, how it all unfolds. Because we also see the stock markets and so on, which are not performing so well in some cases. I already mentioned yesterday that Bitcoin is currently somewhat decoupling from the stock markets, and that is definitely a good story. I've told you many times before, if we have a decoupling here, then Bitcoin will become even more interesting for new groups of investors, because people always look for uncorrelated assets and not the normal assets that are already correlated with the ones they have in their portfolio. From Canada, there are small concessions saying that they will lift tariffs if the USA does the same. Someone also writes here that this would be bullish for Bitcoin. Yes, we have to watch everything closely to see how it develops. And then we had a very exciting story here, also posted by Zero Hedge. We see here that the yields on 5-year government bonds have dropped to 3.877%, the lowest level since October. So, these are the US government bonds. And this could also be a reason why people are currently pushing the Bitcoin price up or why Bitcoin is being pushed up. I mean, we have also seen some large purchases. We now have MicroStrategy making moves. We have seen a few more companies, like GameStop and so on. This means the buying side is definitely strong at the moment. But we also have the macroeconomic environment, which potentially speaks in favor of Bitcoin. We see that interest rates are falling on US bonds. This means that currently, a lot of people are buying US government bonds, 5-year government bonds. This means when the demand goes up, the interest rates go down. The value of the government bonds then goes up. This means there is an inverse relationship with government bonds. This is always a bit difficult to understand. Interest rates go down, but the value of the bond then goes up. And this also means that when people want to invest in government bonds or something similar during uncertain times, there is virtually less and less yield. That means the people who are uncertain now are primarily going into government bonds because there might still be higher interest rates. The more people invest in them, the more the interest rates will fall. And when the interest rates on U.S. government bonds fall, which are considered a safe haven here, it's always seen as the ultimate. The U.S. government bond is the safest thing in the investor market. And when the interest rates fall here, then the spread to risk assets and to Bitcoin is not as high anymore. And if you no longer get a high, risk-free return here, then the incentive to invest in risk assets, like Bitcoin or tech stocks, is higher. That means the more the interest rates fall here, the better it is for risk assets like Bitcoin. So, Bitcoin is not a risk asset, but the entire market classifies it as a risk asset. I always tell you, I don't see it as a risk asset. Bitcoin is completely without third-party risk and much more. But the overall market still sees it simply as a speculation, and that's why Bitcoin benefits from low interest rates. That means if interest rates continue to fall here, perhaps through the Department of Government Efficiency, by which the U.S. might further spread the U.S. dollar worldwide through stablecoins, then later will have to buy even more treasury, rebuilds, and so on. If this trend continues and interest rates keep falling, which is also what Donald Trump wants, then that's definitely very good for Bitcoin, because then fewer investors will go into government bonds here, or they might go into other government bonds where the yields are perhaps higher again, and the money will then make a shift from risk-off assets to risk-on assets. What was quite a crazy story here was posted by the Cubase people. They say here, wow, the Atlanta Federal Reserve has just revised its GDP estimate for the first quarter of 2025 downward again, to minus 3.7%. I've told you several times that they have revised their estimates downward multiple times, indicating that they are very, very pessimistic. Adjusted for gold imports and exports, the Atlanta Fed now expects a GDP decline of 1.4% in the first quarter of 2025. Just 2 months ago, the GDP had grown by 3.8% in the same period. The reason for the revision was current economic data showing a decline in spending, leading the Atlanta Fed to suggest a recession. So, the big question here is whether they have already announced a recession. There was also a very, very interesting interview. I actually wanted to show it to you a few days ago. I think it was 2 or 3 days ago. The U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, was asked on live TV what he thinks about the Atlanta Fed because they are being so pessimistic. Then Howard Lutnick started laughing in the interview and said, "Those are all fake data. They're all losers. Those are all fake data," and so on. That wouldn't be true. That means we have 2 different forecasts here. The Federal Reserve is rather pessimistic here. They say no, the economic forecast is not so great. They're even going so far as to almost predict a recession. And on the other side, there's this Howard Lutnick, who says, hey, those are all fake data and so on. I mean, we all know this. The inflation data is faked. The GDP data is faked. All the forecasts are faked. We're in a huge mess. But yeah, we still have to, I would say, look at it with interest because the market and the finance ministers and so on, they do pay attention to what the central banks say. And if the central banks have a pessimistic outlook, saying, okay, a recession is coming and so on, it naturally has an impact on the market. But potentially, if it heads towards a recession, you can see it negatively on one hand. But on the other hand, it would also mean that the central banks are more open again to pump liquidity into the markets. That means if the GDP goes down, if the economy stagnates and so on, then Powell will have to step in at some point. He has already hinted that QT is being scaled back. Potentially, it could then move further into QE. I saw an interesting article by Arthur Hayes, who broke this down. I still need to read it thoroughly, but he predicted exactly this, that we are now in a transition between QT and QE. And then we have to wait until the massive money floodgate opens, and then Bitcoin could benefit massively from it. And now there was actually another development that really surprised me because I've been reporting on this from time to time, saying, hey, Putin and Russia and so on, they are opening up to Bitcoin. Then it was also said that Putin stated, hey, Bitcoin cannot be banned, it cannot be censored, and so on. Then, I believe, the trade minister of Russia actually said that, yes, Bitcoin is being used for international trade and so on. And now there is actually a very, very astonishing piece of news. Let me show you. It says here, Russia is seeking legal frameworks for the sale of confiscated Bitcoins from criminal activities. Russia wants to monetize confiscated Bitcoins despite legal hurdles in a sensational bribery case. So, it seems they don't want to build a stockpile like the USA, where confiscated Bitcoins are simply kept, but rather, they apparently want to actually sell them. That means, is Russia becoming the new Germany here? But it could also be a fat campaign, because Russia could of course make the boss move and just send a signal outward, like, hey, we don't care about Bitcoin, we're selling it now, and so on.
But secretly, are they filling their pockets through Bitcoin mining or some other secret Bitcoin purchases?
So we see very contradictory statements here. On one hand, there are bullish statements from Putin, from the finance minister or trade minister, I don't remember who said it, one of the two said it, that they are using Bitcoin for international trade. That also made big headlines in the press. I even made a video, like, hey, Russia is now using Bitcoin for international trade, and now they seem to be really pulling back. It further states here that Russia is on the verge of selling Bitcoin as part of criminal investigations and seizures, while authorities are working on creating a legal framework for handling such digital assets, reports the local media outlet, RBC. According to the report, the Russian Federal Enforcement Service is leading the efforts, in coordination with other government agencies, to convert seized cryptocurrencies into state revenue. Dmitry Blablabla, head of the Federal Bailiff Service, confirms that the authorities are developing a legal and operational mechanism to convert seized bitcoins into state revenue. The initiative is expected to kick off with a widely reported case involving a former official who was implicated in a bribery scandal in the crypto sector. So, it might also be that there are regulatory stories involved here again. In Germany, it was also the case that it had to be pushed through regulatorily, but it's just strange. Why not do it like the USA, especially when you're on the brink of nation-state FOMO, and say, okay, we'll just convert the confiscated Bitcoin into a stockpile. That would have been a much better measure for Germany as well. You simply convert it into a stockpile. We also have on the 5th of April, there's still the big audit pending, where it will be announced how much Bitcoin the USA really has, whether they have sold Bitcoin or still have all of it, whether they have the keys for it or have lost Bitcoin. Whatever, there are some really crazy rumors about it. In any case, we need to pay close attention to Donald Trump's speech later. Prepare yourselves for some volatility. Get ready. At the moment, things look pretty good, the markets, but we never know. Donald Trump is very, very unpredictable if some bombshell comes out. I don't know, Donald Trump. I now believe he is capable of anything. Then you might see another dip downwards here. Or there could really be a relief rally where people realize, okay, maybe Donald Trump was just bluffing. Now, things are moving forward again. Now there's more security coming back into the market. Feel free to write in the comments below how you assess the situation. I'll also include a link below to 21 Bitcoin, showing you how you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. With the code, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. And I'll also include a link to a TREZOR Howard wallet. This is very, very important now, that you hold Bitcoin in self-custody and not on an exchange. With TREZOR, you can easily keep your Bitcoin in self-custody. This is an absolute recommendation from me. With the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get an additional 10% off the purchase of a TREZOR Howard wallet. Guys, peace out.